My father, he struggled really badly with his mental health during his lifetime, but he had the same fate. He died of a heart attack. He'd had a minor car accident, just a little bump, like nothing major, but obviously the stress of that, he got out of his car and then bam, had a heart attack, dropped dead at 59. And it makes me feel really sad because I think if more people understood that there are very, very strong links now, causal links that we have between increased consumption of saturated fat and increased risk of heart disease, then they would perhaps make these simple changes to elevate their health and hopefully have more time with their loved ones, not just more time growing their business, but more time with the people that they choose to surround themselves with in their personal life as well. So this is really something I'm so passionate about. And me personally, you know, I have familial hypercholesterolemia, so I had a raised cholesterol in my 20s and I thought I was doing everything right. You know, I was eating lots of salads and, you know, lean chicken and fish, and I was exercising every day, super fit, and yet I still had a raised cholesterol. So I felt as though it was my genetic destiny to, you know, once I hit menopause, I'd probably then inherit the same kind of genetic risks as the male members of my family and eventually succumb to heart disease. But interestingly, a lot of the research on diet shows that along with statins, I think it's really important to take medication where you need to. Lifestyle changes can make a huge difference to the risk. And in fact, it was only when I adopted a whole foods plant-based diet personally that I was actually able to bring my cholesterol and my other lipid profile, like LDL, HDL, etc., all into normal levels. Thank you.
Gemma, you're very, very welcome to the ScaleX Insider podcast. Delighted and thrilled to have you on the show today.
Thank you so much. I am delighted to be here with you.
I appreciate
After a few technical difficulties.
Indeed, I appreciate your incredible persistence. You clearly walk your talk, because after 45 minutes of stressing with technology, you never missed a beat. So whatever you're doing is working. So we're going to get into a little bit of that today. I open up the podcast with this question to all of our guests, which will be an interesting one to a doctor. Our vision is to inspire, connect, and enable millions of ambitious leaders of small to medium-sized enterprises to scale with purpose. So, Gemma, what does scaling with purpose mean to you?
It's a good question. And it's interesting for me as a doctor to come to this question, because my work is really seeing patients, and I've had to pivot slightly in wanting to reach more people. So I've gone into writing books and podcasts and speaking at international conferences. So for me, scaling up my message is aiming to sort of reach people, not just in the clinic consultation room, but on many different platforms, including social media and in medical education and in the education of the public. But in terms of how to do that and the essence of it, I think really having a deep understanding of your personal values is key to scaling up in the way that will actually give you satisfaction for your personal mission, whatever that might be. Because it's quite easy to just follow the path of other people because you think, well, that's how you be successful. But I think in order to feel truly successful on the inside, not just other people's perceptions of what success is, then I think a really, really keen understanding of what your personal values are is the bedrock of doing that successfully.
And it's so refreshing to hear this message coming from a medical doctor. I find your message and your work incredible because it's not typical and it's quite contrarian to medical doctors, which, you know, for the layman, we go to our doctors and they typically prescribe medicine. But your approach is much more holistic. So I'm curious as to how you've ventured away from the very traditional family kind of medical practice, which a lot of our listeners will be familiar with, and really embraced a much more holistic approach to getting well and staying well.
Can you hear the dog?
We did. We got a little bark, but it's absolutely fine.
I'm just going to shut the door.
Oh, that's brilliant. Our microphone's definitely picking that up now. Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's brilliant.
This is just, hilarious. This is the interview from hell.
Claire will love this because she's going to get all of this. So the editing will be good fun.
All right, so we have quiet. Let me continue.
There we go.
So that's a great question. And I think for me, what's been foundational in making shifts is, well, firstly, I still do the kind of general practice that you just described. I am a senior partner at a busy NHS doctor's surgery. So I am still doing all the stuff that you might expect a GP to do. But I'm also doing this in addition because I felt as though it was so important to me to educate the public in a way, because I love seeing my patients. It's what brings me the most joy, is trying to make a difference in people's lives. And yes, I've only got 10 minutes, but because I've got more of a long-standing relationship with those patients, I do get more time because I can bring them back in and we can discuss lifestyle changes. And so I get to see their whole family. I get to see them from cradle to grave, which is wonderful. But in addition to that, I felt as though there's a lot of suffering in the world, and there's a lot more people that require these simple free messages that just don't get them from people who are living this day in, day out. Because, GPs, we see everything. We see babies, we see pregnant women, we see elderly frail, we see, bodybuilders, we see all sorts of people. And, they all have very different struggles, but I think where they have a lot in common is, especially since the pandemic, there's been a lot more isolation. There's been a lot more feeling as though people were very separated. And there's been increasing rates of mental health issues, increasing rates of male suicide. And I'm seeing all of this play out in my practice, but obviously that's also playing out across the country and even globally. So I just really wanted to reach more people. And that's why I came up with my gloves framework, because I wanted people to know that there were just very simple, easy, free tools that they could use to start feeling better, whatever their starting point. Because I tend to see people when they're really sick usually, and it's quite nice to be able to give people these nuggets of information when they're already feeling okay, but they just want to, get to the next level, or they're starting to feel as though they're struggling, and then they want to, a way to kind of get back out of that. So it's for everyone, basically.
I love acronyms, and I love your gloves framework. For those who are listening, you won't be able to see me holding up Gemma's wonderful new book, Get Well, Stay Well, and I encourage you all to go out and grab a copy of this. This is my kind of read. I wrote an article some years ago because people were curious as to my daily routine. I've always enjoyed health and well-being, and in fact, the approach on our program to support ambitious leaders of SMEs to scale with purpose is very much one that's focused on leading self first before you lead others, before you lead an organization. And I feel with that approach, the way you model your own health and well-being, your approach to scaling the business will ultimately ripple out through your team, through the organization, and those that come in contact with you and the organization. My article was about focusing on things that made good sense, the sense being an acronym for sleep, exercise, nutrition, self-care, and environment. I have no experience, no qualifications to write about any of this other than my own experience. But so I'm really curious, before we get into the gloves framework and really unpack that, where did gloves come from?
Well, it's interesting because, well, not just during the pandemic, but before that, I would use gloves all the time. I'd use them for taking blood tests, doing intimate examinations, and I had a nurse come and see me, and she was experiencing a type of eczema that was caused by wearing latex gloves. And she was talking to me about how her hands had become red raw. And it would have probably been enough just to say to her, well, use non-latex gloves, here's some emollient creams, here's a bit of a steroid cream to help with the particularly severe patches, and away you go. And she probably would have been perfectly happy with that. But when I delved a little bit deeper and asked her a few questions about her life in general, how she was doing, what her routines were, there was another level to the story. You know, she was a nurse and she was working hard, she was playing hard, so she would spend the weekends, you know, drinking with her friends. She lived in a house share. She struggled to get the energy to go to work, so she was having, you know, things like a lot of energy drinks. She didn't do much home cooking. She didn't really have that skill set, and there were a number of ways in which she was struggling over and above the actual skin condition that she came to me with. And we just chatted about a few things that she felt she could change in her day-to-day life. Basic things, like she decided that she would start batch cooking on a Sunday, and she decided that that way she would be ordering less takeaway meals during the week. And she decided that she would set an alarm to help her go to bed at an earlier time rather than staying in front of the TV for as long as she would when she was trying to relax in the evening, and consistently wake up at the same time, regardless of whenever her shift was going to start. And those changes essentially were really life-changing for her. She found that her energy levels improved, her eczema improved, and she also had an improvement in her thyroid function. And it just struck me, you know, as I was dealing with one problem which was caused specifically by gloves and using gloves every day in my practice, I realized that these 6 lifestyle habits also fitted the acronym of gloves very, very well. And I also loved that it led with our emotional world, because our emotional world feeds into our physical world, and the decisions that we make about what we eat, the decisions that we make about how much we move, and the decisions we make about how much sleep we get. So I was really happy with being able to include some psychological techniques and tools at the very forefront of the book, so that it can, you know, filter through into the rest.
Well, we've teased our listeners with the acronym gloves. Let's get into this, because I love all of these, and this is why I'm beaming, because I've never heard a medical doctor talk about these practices. So I love that you're now bringing these to the world to make an impact that's beyond a prescription and what we know as prescription medicine. So let's begin.
Thank you,
So
Brendan.
the G.
Yes, let's get into it. So should I tell everyone what they all are, and then we
Well,
can go
let's
into
go.
E?
Let's do that.
Okay, all right. So G in gloves stands for gratitude. L in gloves stands for love. O is outside. V is veggies. E is exercise. And S is sleep. So that's the structure: gratitude, love, outside, veggies, exercise, and sleep. And as I said before, I love that gratitude and love are at the front. And it's not, I really also want to say, this is not coming from a place of trying to be positive all the time, like trying to make sure that, you know, everything feels fantastic 24/7. It's actually about really integrating what it means to be human, what it means to suffer, what it means to struggle, because we will all experience those things. And I think having a psychological space where we can understand that this is part of the human experience and search for the gratitude within that experience is going to be one of the very first steps towards feeling good for life.
Yeah, it's a practice actually in the masterminds that we host as part of our ScaleX Accelerator program. We open up every mastermind with a round of gratitudes of all of the participants. And
That's
over the course,
fantastic.
yeah, and it works so incredibly well in getting to know the person. And we found that the bonds between people have heightened, have increased as a result of actually sharing personal stories about their kids, about things that they're grateful for. If somebody has recovered from being sick, if for nature, for some business wins, whatever it may be. But the fact that they're sharing something personal to them through the practice of gratitude has been really powerful in creating that bond, which we want. We want to create this scaling community. Where does it fit in from a practical perspective? People might say, yeah, we're hearing about this gratitude thing again. Is there evidence to suggest that this works beyond something that some might perceive as a little bit abstract, a little bit woo-woo? Here we go with the gratitude thing again. If I'm really struggling through my business, what place does this have? And what does it look like, Gemma? How do we practice it?
So these are wonderful questions, and I love that you're asking them, because part of the reason I wrote the book was that I wanted there to be an evidence-based tool for people to turn to. And yeah, there's loads of studies to show that living with more of a sense of gratitude can actually boost our general well-being and our physical health. And interestingly, it can also extend our lifespan. And this is not just anecdotal evidence. It's interesting because every patient that I have looked after between the ages of around sort of 96, 97 to over 100, whenever I ask them, what's your secret? How have you managed to live this long, vibrant life? They'll all come up with slightly different answers, but the overwhelming majority of them have this real sense of gratitude and dare I say it, happiness about them. They've just got this aura of just, that positivity. And I don't think that's a coincidence. And interestingly, when we look into observational data of large populations of people, we see that having a sense of gratitude, a good sense of humor, these kinds of attributes have actually been shown to extend lifespan, which I found absolutely fascinating. Because the ones that we can usually measure are those physical metrics, the things that we're eating, our body weight, our blood pressure, our cholesterol levels. These are the things that we like, more of a solid outcome. But when you look at psychological studies, you also see that happiness and a positive mindset and a good sense of humor are also associated with a longer lifespan, which I thought was really, really great.
So I always keen whenever I host a wonderful guest like you, Gemma, to make the hour really super practical for our listeners. So if we buy into the fact that I do, but I'm asking these questions on behalf of our listeners, but if we buy into the practice of gratitude, practically what might that look like, on a daily basis, weekly basis? What is it a gratitude journal? Is it saying thank you when we go into the shop? What does it look like?
It's all of those things. And in the book, I've got practical tips people can choose if it's something that they resonate with the most. So there's something called the meaning maker exercise that you can do, which is a really interesting way of reframing certain experiences that you may have had, whether it's an interaction with a colleague or whether it's something to do with a family member or a friend that you've fallen out with. I actually did this exercise myself with a patient, many times, in fact, which is incredibly healing, because what it does is it allows you to find the moment of gratitude within a struggle. And quite simply, I can explain the patient, actually. It's a lovely story. He was having headaches and everything in his life was great. He was successful financially. He was successful in his business. He'd recently had a baby. His marriage was good. And it was hard for him to think of anything that had precipitated these headaches until, I delved a little bit deeper. And he'd recently had a big falling out with his father. He had a huge issue around his father lying about money, getting into debt, asking his son for money. And there were some addiction issues there with the father as well. And the son had decided that for the time being, it was best to limit contact because of the feeling of betrayal that he had experienced. And although it wasn't in the forefront of his mind, as he was talking about it, you could see that it caused him a lot of emotional pain. And we went through some of the things that he learnt about that experience. And I asked him to describe it in very objective terms to start with. So rather than using terms that he had been in his own mind about how his father had betrayed him, how his father thought he was a fool, how his father had kind of abused his trust. These are kind of really strong words that we say to ourselves in these experiences, abuse and betrayal and things like this. So I asked him, why don't you write down just the facts of what actually happened in this particular circumstance. And so the fact was that his father had asked him for money. So he wrote that down. And when I asked him to take out all of the emotional connotations, all of the things about what it meant in their relationship, and just look at the facts, then asked him, okay, now that you've looked at it from this more objective point of view, the fact is that your father asked you for money. That's actually all that objectively happened in this situation. What have you learned from this situation that makes you feel proud about who you are as a person? And he said, well, I've actually learned that family and connection with family is really important to me. And in this struggle that I've had with my father, I've realized how much it's had an impact on me. And that means that family is really important to me. I said, okay, that's really interesting. Is there anything else? And he said, yeah, I've learned that, it's integrity is a really important value in my life. And that's been really helpful for me to understand, because I don't think I really fully appreciated it before. And I said, okay, and is there anything else that you've learned? And he said, yeah, I've learned that when I'm in my business world, as well as with my family, if I can show up and do things in an honest way, that really helps me with my business. And okay, great, write that down. And as he was writing down some of the things that he'd learned, you could see his demeanor shifting. You could see that it felt there was more of a weight lifting off his shoulders. And we did another exercise another day, which involved writing a forgiveness letter, which was another really helpful step. But simply doing that meaning maker exercise was really powerful, because it strips away a lot of the negative emotion, and it adds in an emphasis on what we learn about ourselves moving forward, which, it sounds straightforward, but it's something that we don't often do. So it was a wonderful exercise for him.
I love that, and it speaks directly to the very first principle of our 10 principle ScaleX framework, which is psyche. Lack of ambition of the leader is cited as the single greatest impediment as to why SME leaders do not scale, and less than actually 0.5% of SMEs in the UK at the moment are achieving scale. And this lack of ambition is really, when you unpack that, it becomes interesting to learn the sinister self-stories that a lot of leaders tell themselves, whether that's I can't, I don't have the capability, what if I fail, what would people say about me? Even something more sinister is actually a fear of success in itself, because it conflicts with the area that you grew up with, or might overshadow some siblings. So that inner self story is really, really interesting. And I love the fact that gratitude can help mitigate the impact of a negative self-story. Something else you refer to again, which I love to see, but it's so contrarian to a medical doctor talking about these things, is visualization and manifestation. I'm a big fan of Abraham Hicks, so I'm a huge believer in the power of visualization and manifestation in the context of supporting a change in our self-story. Can you speak to those and why you felt it was important to include manifestation in this book without risking judgment from your peers?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing, isn't it? I think for me, the power of visualization is really helpful. And looking at the word manifestation versus visualization and how people perceive the word, that was something that was quite important to me as well, because I wanted the book, from a personal level, I do have a spiritual practice, and I wanted the book to appeal to people who, like me, have a spiritual practice, but I also wanted it to appeal to people who don't, and who feel as though words like manifestation are woo-woo. So what I aim to do is actually look at the data, like what kind of psychological data do we have to support the idea of manifestation? And interestingly, the most common way that we can actually relate this to something physical and concrete is when we think about people in sports. And often what people in sports will do is they will visualize a certain race, they will visualize a game, they will visualize what they're aiming to do in a competition. And when they do this, they find that they're much more successful in the endeavor that they're doing. And the same thing applies when you look at things like being able to even move muscle. If you wanted to look at something objectively, there was an interesting study where they got people to lift weights, and they got other people to imagine they were lifting weights, but they were imagining it in the first person. So they were watching themselves lift a weight without actually moving their arms, but they were just visualizing themselves in their bodies lifting a weight. And then the third group was visualizing themselves as though they were in a movie. You know, they were watching themselves from another place lifting weights. And the interesting thing is that the group of people who were visualizing themselves lifting weights as if they were in their own body, watching their arm go up and down, actually experienced an increase in their ability, in their muscular strength, in their ability to lift weights when they were tested, simply from the act of visualizing that they were doing so. So although it didn't increase their actual muscle fibers, it did increase their strength, which is really so fascinating to me. What do you think of that kind of data?
Well, it's interesting. I'm smiling as you read it because we actually lifted that piece of research for our own book because the second principle of scaling is purpose and vision. And so I'm a huge fan, and we coach on visualization as part of the program that we coach on. In fact, something interesting we encourage our participants to do is actually to write their retirement speech 10 years out. So we say, imagine it's
Wow.
2034 and you're standing in front of everyone within your company, who's there, how many's there, which countries do they represent, and it's a very, very powerful exercise. And then we support our participants to reverse engineer from there. So that exercise of going 10 years out, which ultimately helps then create your North Star, the direction of travel. You're speaking to everything that I really align to and I really resonate with, Gemma. I want to appeal to the listeners who maybe are hearing this for the first time, and maybe we'll just, before we move on to love, maybe just pick up on the nuance between visualization and manifestation, and how from a business scaling perspective, people maybe who are hearing about manifestation think, well, what is that? Do I create this visions board and sit in front of it? And what does a practical manifestation practice look like?
Well, quite simply, it looks like giving yourself a moment to imagine a positive future. So a simple way of doing that would be to think about firstly what your values are and where you are right now, and then think about where those values will take you. Quite often you can't always necessarily visualize how good you could do something, how amazing. Sometimes I often speak to people who say, I could never have imagined the amazing things that have happened because of X, Y, and Z, and the things that I did that then led to this outcome. But what you can do is imagine something that's positive, that's in the future, that is potentially within your control. Just close your eyes and visualize the emotions that you will have at that moment, having achieved that thing or having become that person, and spend a bit of time just immersing yourself in that feeling, immersing yourself in the feeling of how that would feel in your body, not just on an intellectual level, but how that would feel in your heart, how that would feel in your stomach, how that would feel in your fingertips, how that would feel in your legs, how that would feel all over. And if you aim to stay in that emotional state whilst imagining these things, that's what visualization is. And in a way, you could say that that's what helps you to manifest. But of course, not everything within our life is within our control. In fact, very little of it in some senses is. I think often I see this in medicine, the worst of outcomes are often kind of, we're blindsided by them because we can't possibly have imagined them. But what we can do is imagine things for the future for ourselves that feel good. And it helps us to put certain actions in place to get there. But also, it in some ways takes away some of the pressure, because you're just living in that feeling. And as long as you're living in that feeling and coming from that feeling, it takes the pressure and the wanting and the desire away from the outcome, which again is quite a positive thing, I think, because you want to have that positive energy in your life as well.
Yeah, you've explained that beautifully. And I've just come from a workshop yesterday, and we share with our leaders about your vibe attracting your tribe, your resonance, your frequency attracts people who are resonating on a similar frequency. And it's no accident that successful people with positive energy actually attract other people into their circle who have positive energy. And so what you're saying really, really resonates. And I'm a huge fan of Dr. Joe Dispenza. He talks about, if you're not inspired by a vision of the future, then you get snagged on the memories of the past. And what we're saying here is, if you're frustrated about not achieving what you think you should be achieving at this point, it won't come to you if you stay in that state of feeling frustrated. What I've found, you'll just continue to attract other things that frustrate you in your life. But when you can shift yourself to a place...
It's a terrible irony, isn't it?
I know. So that's how I'm translating this, in terms of, as challenging as it may be when you're feeling frustrated, when things may not be going as well as you expect them to go. It's sitting down and visualizing, well, what would great look like? How would I feel? And then trying to stay in that state. And in some way, the universe conspires to support that. So, and I love the fact that you're writing about that. So we could do a whole podcast on this alone. I'm conscious of that. So moving on to love.
But also, just to say, Brendan, it's a good way of letting it go as well, because I think sometimes we can get very fixated on a specific goal, and then if that goal doesn't happen, you can go into a negative spiral. So what I love about this process is that you can not only visualize something amazing, which will give you hopefully access to those more positive emotions, but it's also a way of just letting it go, just letting it be. Whatever will be. And as long as you put your most positive mindset into it and a more positive state of being, you don't have to, it's not your responsibility to strive and to make it happen. You just can let it go at the same time, which I think is a helpful thing to remember.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think that's important, that, your book won't reach millions if you just sit and visualize your book in hands of millions. You still have to show up and do the podcast, do the interviews alongside running a very, very busy practice. But the fact that you end up on Rich Roll's podcast and Dr. Rangan Chatterjee's podcast, ultimately these things start to happen. You create your surface area of luck as a result of actually visualizing the book from a place of great intention, being in the hands of millions.
Thank you. Yes, exactly that.
So,
I
love.
I do my best.
You're doing
so
wonderful.
Love.
It's amazing.
Oh, so love. Not many doctors talk about love, right?
No.
And to be fair, when I'm seeing patients in my clinic and I'm checking their blood pressure and I'm tinkering with their medications, I don't always talk about love either. But I do think it's a really important pillar of health and well-being. And it is something that I do discuss from time to time with them, especially when they're coming in with more emotional issues. And essentially, I think the reason it's so important is because if we come at life with the idea that we're here to give love in any way that we can, again, it brings more positivity into our emotional, physical world. And So in order to define that, so again, it seems quite a nebulous concept. Or what does it mean? Oh, just give love or be loving. Well, yeah, I think it does. If you come at a business interaction with a loving intention, if you come at a difficult conversation with your husband, your wife, your kids, your parents, with that loving attitude, then it gives you a very different outcome than if you're coming just thinking about the struggles that you're in. And so I wanted to talk about love as the second pillar, because I do think it really underpins a lot of our physical health as well. We know that our physical health is impacted by our mental health and vice versa. And I don't think there is a single patient that I've seen that on some level doesn't have some kind of psychological impact from a physical pain or vice versa. So this is really important stuff. And to make it practical, what I've done in the book is I've explained things that you can do to feel more loving. And that also encompasses self-compassion. So I talk about the power of positive self-talk exercises, for example. Doesn't have to necessarily be the word affirmations. Some people kind of find that a bit jarring. And sometimes some affirmations just don't feel true or don't ring true to you. So really, it's about finding positive phrases or words that you can say about yourself that feel true to you, that your mind won't immediately reject. And I've got a whole section in the book with suggestions, because sometimes it's quite hard to think of those things off the top of your head if you're not used to thinking these more positive things about yourself. And also things like positive role models. It's really helpful, I think, to find somebody in your life that can act as a mentor, or somebody that you admire and that you aspire to be like. Again, it just kind of brings it down to a much more practical level. And some people sadly don't have anyone in their immediate social circle that they feel that way about. And in that kind of scenario, I'll suggest to them, well, is there a famous character from a book that you've read, or a film that you've watched, or a series that you've enjoyed that has certain attributes that you really feel that you resonate with and that you'd like to emulate? And you can ask them questions about what they would do. And obviously, you can't really ask them those questions because they're a character, but you can do that as a mental exercise to allow you a bit of space between a problem that you're experiencing and a possible solution. And it's a nice way of bringing in a third party if you don't have a mentor in your life currently that you feel that you can trust.
Anything else that we can do under this pillar to create happier workplaces? I know you write to that specifically, and what I'm hearing is, look, come to conversations, not necessarily with your own agenda, but with a great intent, a loving intent. And sometimes people, I think, in the context of the workplace, people can find that a little bit icky. What do I love my staff? What does that look like practically? So what can we do for the business leaders listening, if they're going into, listening to this on the way into work, maybe about to head into a difficult meeting potentially, what practically, leaning on this pillar, can we do to create happier workplaces? And we know that happier workplaces ignite greater engagement from our teams and ultimately greater productivity and undergird scaling success.
I think for me, the main thing that you can do if you're going to be going into perhaps a difficult meeting or something that requires a bit of delicacy, the number one thing is active listening. Quite often we have things that we want to say, but we don't think about what the other person's wanting to say. And when they're speaking, we're thinking about the thing that we're going to say next, rather than thinking about actually being in the moment and listening. So I think active listening is the number one thing that you can do when it comes to talking to people that you're hoping to lead and inspire. And that involves actually listening, being in the moment, ideally looking at them, maybe even looking into their eyes, but not for too long. Don't want to make them feel awkward, but actively listening and then repeating back what they've said to you. It's very straightforward and it sounds silly, but it really isn't. If you repeat back what they're saying, or you can literally say also, from my understanding, let me know if this is right, what you're saying is X, Y, Z. They say yes. And then you know that you've heard them. And it makes a huge difference moving forward, because it shows that they feel heard, they feel seen, and they're far more likely to actually want to listen to what you have to say next. And the second piece of advice around that would simply be to think about how you want them to actually feel when they leave that meeting. Again, it does require sometimes a bit of forethought, but if you come at a difficult meeting with the intention of wanting them to feel a certain way when they're leaving, it means that you can navigate that meeting with potentially more compassion, even if it's going to lead to an outcome that they don't want. It reflects well on you as a leader and on you as a business if you've done what you can to make them feel heard, make them feel seen, and understand where they're coming from, whatever the difficult conversation might be.
Oh, that's so profound, and really resonates strongly with the advice from Chris Voss, who I interviewed in the podcast a number of seasons ago, the leading FBI hostage negotiator. And he said he made this point that in those negotiations, and those are often life or death negotiations, the number one skill is not only actively listening but actually listening. So I love that you've brought that up again, Gemma. So the O in the gloves framework, the outside pillar, what does that look like for us?
Yeah, I included it because we are nature. And I know that we don't feel that way because as humans, we've got all these structures and processes and business and all these things around us which take us away from nature. We are nature. And there is so much in our physical health that is impacted by having a lack of green spaces, a lack of just being in the natural world. And again, it's not something that many people feel like they can do much to change, especially as we tend to have sedentary jobs, we tend to be indoors, we tend to be on computers. But it is really vital on a practical level for us to be connected with nature in some way. And there's an awful lot of new research on that. And I talk about that in the book quite extensively. And what that can look like in a business setting, well, it varies depending on the setting that you're in. But I talk about practical things like cold water therapy, the importance of being around and visualizing even blue and green spaces, doing something like grounding, where you literally just take off your shoes and socks and go and stand on the grass. Tips around spending time in the sun and what that could look like. Tips for a healthy home. So if you're working from home or you've got a team that works a lot from home, it might be worth thinking about how you can optimize that home space to feel as though you're part of nature more, or to sort of spend more time that you've got structured time to go outside for a short time in your working day. You bring green spaces into a workplace environment. There was a fascinating study on hospital stays and recoveries, and they looked at patients who were recovering from surgery in rooms that overlooked a green space. It could just be the hospital garden, or rooms that did not. And people who stayed in the rooms that overlooked a green space reported more pleasant hospital stays and had a faster recovery, were able to be discharged home earlier. So these are things that we can think about in the context of your workplace. You know, is it possible for somebody to be responsible for watering some plants every fortnight, in which case you could have a few plants in the workplace, you know? Simple things that don't really cost very much, but can actually really improve our state of mind in ways that many people wouldn't predict.
Yeah, again, I'm smiling on a number of counts in the previous business that I helped lead to become a global organization. We introduced the Fitbits, had little competitions amongst the team to increase their step count and encourage people to create their own little cross-functional walking clubs, walking groups during lunch times, early morning. And I have to say, on a personal note, getting outside, going for a jog, going for a walk, always helps unknot something that feels very knotted and quite challenging. Always a walk out in nature creates a sense of perspective for some reason, but it works. So I love that. And as a
There's,
Wim
I mean, it's true. And there's so many reasons, actually. You said for some reason. Well, I can tell you a few if you like.
go for it. Yeah, because we'd have some cynical, skeptical listeners who'd be going, yeah, that's all grand. So give them some of the research behind this.
All right. So there's loads of research into the power of green spaces coming out of Japan. And what's fascinating is they did this study on people doing forest walks compared to urban walks. And those who partook of forest walks had somewhere in the region of, I think, 40 to 50% increase in natural killer cell production in their bodies, which is a type of white blood cell which helps to support the immune system and fight infection, which is really fascinating. You've got organic compounds released by primarily evergreens that are called phytoncides, which again stimulate this more of a heightened, healthy immune response. You've got the power of fractals, so the way that we perceive the world and how we use our eyes, believe it or not, are also really important. When we have the ability to look out onto a horizon, when we have the ability to look out onto trees, natural settings, even if you had a picture of something which was a natural setting next to your computer, it helps to relax the brain. It actually stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system. So if you're feeling stressed about a meeting or a conversation or something that's happened in the workplace, just taking 20 to 30 seconds to look out the window, believe it or not, can have a very significant impact on your well-being. And the same thing can be true, just as I said, by looking at a screensaver with a natural setting on it. The fractals that you see, these recurring patterns in nature, they are a little bit like, if you could imagine, if you're looking at a tree, you notice that the branches branch off into various patterns. That's essentially what fractals are. They're recurring natural patterns, and you can see them in human lungs, you can see them in trees, in branches, in leaves, you can see them in larger settings like mountain ranges and also coastlines, and you can see them in smaller things like snowflakes, and they are very calming to the human nervous system. So being able to incorporate that into a business setting is really, really helpful.
Yeah. Again, as a Wim Hof method instructor, the cold water therapy really resonates strongly. Of course, it bolsters the immune system amongst a whole range of other benefits, including spiking the dopamine, which we're all chasing. And as I stand here, you can't see it, Gemma, but I'm looking out at the garden, the pond. There's nature just surrounding me here. You're not getting the benefit of that, nor the listeners, but I
Well,
am.
I'm getting the blue. I'm getting the blue mind benefits by looking at your fabulous blue T-shirt.
Oh, there you go. So a reminder of the wonderful blue zones, and I'm standing here, and I'd spur you this in my bare feet because I just love getting out of shoes and socks. So
Oh,
again,
fantastic!
so
This is great.
so all I told you I love your book. So
Yeah,
let's
I'm
let's
beginning to believe you.
let's move on to veggies, and I know you're hugely passionate about all things plant-based.
I am. So I've included a chapter on nutrition because it's logical. There's this incredible study that showed us that 80% of chronic diseases that lead to early death globally can be reduced by 4 simple health habits, which are eating a plant predominant diet, not smoking, sensible use of alcohol, so it's really important to and food is the number one of all of those factors. Food is the number one factor for how we can actually boost our physical health and well-being and reduce the risk of things like heart disease, cancer, diabetes and lung diseases, which are the 4 largest causes of premature death. So this chapter was obviously integral to the book. My previous book, The Plant Powered Doctor, talked all about the power of food. So that was basically completely food focused. It talked about the top diseases of the Western world and how we can reduce the risk. So that was things like heart disease and cancer and diabetes. Talked about hormone health, skin health, and all of health, sort of healthy plant-based eating for all ages. But this book, it is of course one of the pillars for that reason. It is really integral to a healthy body. And I wanted to share recipes as well, which I think sometimes it's hard to know, well, how am I going to eat more plants? What does that mean for me? You know, what am I going to change practically? So I wanted there to be recipes in the book. I've got a QR code that you can tap to look at photos of the recipes to make it feel even more exciting that you get to try these new things. And ultimately, I want people to bring more of that gut diversity, to bring more of that general health into their lives. So I've got tips for nutrients to focus on, recipes. I've talked about things like physical discomfort, bloating. I've talked about food freedom. I actually talk a little bit more in this book about the psychology of food, good mood food, and how we have a positive relationship with food in general rather than feeling restricted. And also why it might be helpful for the future to think about eating more plants because of that very well-known link now between sadly the animal agriculture industry as it stands and environmental degradation. So yeah, it covers all bases essentially in that sense.
Oh, again, there's so much in that. We had Marga Hoyk on, who's a sustainability champion and authority on the Sustainable Development Goals, and I love her strapline: "Business for good is good for business." So what we're saying here is, not only are you supporting yourself by eating more plants, but ultimately supporting the environment as a result of that. But in terms of a heart healthy diet, because I know a lot of the leaders listening, and certainly it's endemic within business, that cardiac disease, the number one killer globally, and we, a lot of times I feel in business we're not helping ourselves when we could. What could you share with our listeners in relation to some of the things, some practical changes they could make to be more heart healthy?
Oh, I could talk about this all day.
Is
And
this another
it's actually
podcast,
something,
Gemma?
yeah, definitely. Because, you know, heart disease, it actually breaks my heart thinking about this. You know, although heart disease rates have come down because we have far less people smoking than we used to, sadly, it is still the number one cause of premature death in the UK and in the entirety of the Western world. So, and also my father, my grandfather, you know, so my grandfather died suddenly of a heart attack. He was a fit, slim, healthy 61-year-old man, dropped dead because he had a heart attack playing tennis. My father, he struggled really badly with his mental health during his lifetime, but he had the same fate. He died of a heart attack. He'd had a minor car accident, just a little bump, like nothing major, but obviously the stress of that, he got out of his car and then bam, had a heart attack, dropped dead at 59. And it makes me feel really sad because I think if more people understood that there are very, very strong links now, causal links that we have between increased consumption of saturated fat and increased risk of heart disease, then they would perhaps make these simple changes to elevate their health and hopefully have more time with their loved ones, not just more time growing their business, but more time with the people that they choose to surround themselves with in their personal life as well. So this is really something I'm so passionate about. And me personally, you know, I have familial hypercholesterolemia, so I had a raised cholesterol in my 20s and I thought I was doing everything right. You know, I was eating lots of salads and, you know, lean chicken and fish, and I was exercising every day, super fit, and yet I still had a raised cholesterol. So I felt as though it was my genetic destiny to, you know, once I hit menopause, I'd probably then inherit the same kind of genetic risks as the male members of my family and eventually succumb to heart disease. But interestingly, a lot of the research on diet shows that along with statins, I think it's really important to take medication where you need to. Lifestyle changes can make a huge difference to the risk. And in fact, it was only when I adopted a whole foods plant-based diet personally that I was actually able to bring my cholesterol and my other lipid profile like LDL, HDL, etc., all into normal levels, where I had struggled to do that before, even when I was super fit and eating what I thought or considered to be a generally healthy diet. And so, yeah, this is really important. And the data we have on epidemiological data on what people eat, large populations of people, plays out very nicely. The more plant proteins you eat, the less likely you are to suffer from heart disease. And it's the number one thing that you can do, according to the American College of Cardiology, is essentially eat a plant predominant diet. So eat more plants, eat more plant protein. That will be your number one goal. So start thinking about where there are some simple swaps that could be done. Like if you love a chicken curry, try and make a chickpea curry. If you love a spaghetti bolognese, maybe try having a lentil bolognese. If you love having, I don't know, pulled pork burrito, maybe try a bean burrito once in a while. Just think about how you can make a few simple plant protein swaps to elevate your health. Oats is another simple thing. They contain beta glucans, which help to draw cholesterol out of the bloodstream. They are fantastic. You can add in flax seeds, chia seeds. These are amazing. You can make morning oatmeal or morning porridge where you have crushed up flax seeds, crushed up chia seeds. You've got your omega-3s there. You've also got amazing properties to these seeds, which allow your blood vessels to become more supple. Add in a few berries and a dash of whatever you fancy, maybe some maple syrup or honey, and you've got a really amazing, filling, actually protein rich, because you've got those seeds and nuts in there as well, energy rich breakfast, which will bring your cholesterol down as well, which is great. So I'm a big fan of flax seeds. Maybe just have a couple of tablespoons of flax seeds every day, sprinkle them in your salad, sprinkle them in a stew or a curry or whatever you're making. You can even use flax seeds as egg replacers if you're into baking. They're a really good binder for baking. And beetroots are another amazing type of food that help to make your blood vessels more supple, increase the nitric oxide that you're producing in your blood vessels, which helps you to lower your blood pressure over time. Basic things that will make a huge difference to your life and your risk of heart disease.
One of our own tribe members, Patrick Woods, who is the CEO of Linwoods, will be absolutely delighted with the huge endorsement there for flax seeds. These guys specialize in flax seeds, sell them across the world, and you just described my breakfast, which is full of the Linwoods products of hemp seed, flax seed, sunflower seed,
Yes.
the berries.
Yes.
So a nod to Patrick and his team there at Linwoods, who are doing a wonderful job at making these available for breakfast, for lunch, for our meals, because people wouldn't.
I actually met him at an event. So I
Oh
was
my
doing a speaking
goodness!
event in Exeter, and
Small world.
Linwoods was sponsoring my speaking event, and I had the wonderful opportunity to have a great chat with him. He was so inspirational. He
There,
really,
well, there,
such an amazing man.
well, there you go. Yeah, you're probably talking about John, his father, who's 80 years of age, and John.
Yes, John. I met
Yeah,
John.
yeah. So his son now has taken over the business, Paddy, and yeah, John's passion for flaxseed came from his own health issues, and is now bringing as a wonderful. As innovators and entrepreneurs do, they're taking their own problem, having solved that problem, and bringing that solution to the world. So he'd be delighted with the shout out. Gemma, how are you for time?
I'm doing pretty well.
Are you okay?
Yeah, I've got about another 10 minutes or so.
10, okay, perfect. Because I was conscious that there's so much in this.
Oh, no.
I love
I
it.
know the book's too thick, the book's too much
And
info. It's like it's a wellness Bible, that's what it is.
it's brilliant. Well, look, we're gonna give it a big plug through this. So let's move on to the importance then of exercise. And I think for all of our listeners, hopefully we're pushing an open door here when we talk about exercise. But just before I move from the vegetables, actually, there's a message ringing in my ear from my personal trainer, who says, remember that your abs aren't made in the gym, they're made in the kitchen. So, and certainly a plant-based diet will support that. But and just before we leave that, maybe I'm hearing what I want to hear, because I do enjoy I enjoy meat, and for those listeners who are of the same mindset, um, you're not saying, or I'm not hearing you say that you must go full plant-based.
No, I'm not saying that because I think a lot of people feel a lot of natural resistance to that. And there's actually some great research, psychological research by Melanie Joy, talking about some of the reasons why we feel a big psychological resistance to the idea of not eating meat at all, which is really interesting. So if you wanted to delve deeper into that, you can. It's Melanie Joy. And I think, I'm trying to remember what her book was called. I think it was something along the lines of why we wear cows, eat pigs, and love dogs, or something like that. It's a really interesting book. But no, I'm not saying that you have to be vegan. I'm just saying that the more you can think about including plants in your life, the better. And the more you do that, the more beneficial health outcomes you will experience. So, I mean, for me, on a personal level, it was only when I went all in that I experienced the cholesterol lowering benefits that I wanted to see. But that's not going to necessarily be true of everybody. And everybody is quite unique in the things that they enjoy. So I like to think about this in terms of abundance. The more you can think about creating wonderful recipes, giving healthy options a try, then the better off you'll be. Rather than thinking I have to restrict myself from all the things I love, think about how you can add more things that will make you feel good.
Brilliant. Eat for health, not just satiation. So, exercise, what should we be doing and how often should we be doing it?
Well, I mean, we do have national kind of government guidelines on physical activity and the amount of minutes per week, 150 minutes per week if we can. And that can vary. If you're having a high intensity workout, you might not need to do as much. But I think it's important to aim to move your body every day, which again can be hard if you have a sedentary lifestyle and you're on a screen a lot, and as many of us are. But what's interesting is that when you look at happiness research, only 10 minutes a week is enough to actually boost our psychological well-being. So apart from the physical aspects of moving your body, just feeling good, just feeling happy, it could even be as little as 10 minutes a week that will make a difference to your psychology. So hopefully all of us can do at least that. And I would aim for moving every day if you can. But if that seems like too much of a task, then just think, okay, well, what can I do in that 10 minutes that will really boost my mental health and well-being? And in the book, I've got some simple stretches. I've got a 4-minute easy workout you can do in your kitchen if you're not somebody that is hugely into things like going to the gym or running marathons or whatever else. If you're not really that kind of person, aiming to make it fun, aiming to join a class if you're a very sociable person, if you can find the time. And also, believe it or not, I've included in the exercise section breath work and something called Qigong, which is a physical, energetic way of moving, which is just actually quite almost like an active relaxation, which can involve really simply just doing Tai Chi sort of movements, but in a way that allows you almost a form of moving meditation, which is really helpful as well for our mental health. And I've got an example of that in the book as well. So anything that you can do to move your body is going to be good for you.
Yeah, and of course we can couple this up with the third pillar of getting outside and incorporating movement whilst we're enjoying the outdoors. And thankfully, coming into this
Yeah,
time of year, we've a great excuse to get outdoors. So, and I have to
absolutely.
say,
And I
I've
used
come.
to do running as well. I mean, I did a couple of marathons and I found it almost very meditative, just going on my long training runs, which is something that people don't necessarily think of when they're thinking about exercise. It's a form of meditation in a way.
Likewise, and I think from a business leader's perspective, having spent, 30 years now almost in business, and having met hundreds, thousands of business leaders, we spend a lot of time in our heads, and I feel, and I have found certainly the quickest way of changing your mental state is actually to move, to change your physical state. So that again, the benefit of just getting out for a walk or run in nature is so incredibly beneficial in terms of actually, back to what we said earlier, changing that perspective and getting a different lens on something that you perceive as a really, really deep challenge at the moment. Coming on to something that certainly I'm challenged with, sleep, the final pillar of our Gloves framework.
Yeah. So sleep is, I think a lot of us are reading more about how vital sleep is and how important it is that we get enough and all of the physical problems that we could experience if we don't get enough. So what I wanted to focus on in the book is actually, well, how do we practically get more sleep and what that looks like for different people? Because there are some people who have struggled with insomnia for years and who've done almost everything they could possibly think of to optimize their sleep routine and still struggle to sleep. Whereas there are others who don't prioritize it and don't necessarily realize the benefits of prioritizing it. So I aim to try and reach both populations of people with the book. First up, by giving people simple, practical things they can do to improve their sleep routine. And secondly, by describing something called insomnia-focused cognitive behavioral therapy and the principles behind it that you can use if you've been someone who would describe themselves as a chronic insomniac.
How many hours should we be getting, and some practical things to support a more sleep-inducing bedtime routine?
I think how many hours does vary per person, but on average, somewhere between 7 and 9 is ideal. And what you want to try and do is actually just go outside first thing in the morning and stick to a very consistent waking time. So if you would normally wake up at 6:30 or 7, aim to continue to do that on a weekend as well as during the week. And as soon as it's light, just go outside and look at the sky, not directly at the sun, even on a rainy day. Just go up, look at the sky for a few seconds, maybe about 30 seconds or so, and then go and carry on with your day. What that will do, it will it'll help your body to release serotonin, some of which about 12 hours later will turn into melatonin, which will encourage your natural circadian rhythm and will allow you to start feeling sleepy later in the day. That's probably my number one tip, but there are many more. You want to try and create a generally more restful experience in the evening. So checking your emails before you go to sleep is a real no-no. You want to try and have a relaxing bedtime experience. So if you do have your phone with you and you can't leave it in another room to charge, then try not to watch things on there that cause you emotional pain or disrupt you before sleep. If you're scrolling on Instagram, you might be seeing horrific images of a war zone, and then you might be seeing a cat fiddling with a doorknob or something. It's very jarring emotionally. So really aim to protect your emotional space before bed is my other top tip. Many people find that by watching a TV program that they're familiar with, that they enjoy, or reading a book before bed, or having nice low-level lighting, maybe having a bedtime journal where you write down your to-do list so it's not whirring in your mind, or just writing down things that you're grateful for, which kind of circles us right back to the beginning.
Yeah, I love that, and it's a practice that I have before bedtime. Each evening is just taking 5 minutes to capture the 3 wins from the day. And no matter how challenging the day has been, you can always find something that represents a win. So, look, this conversation today has certainly been a real win for me. It'll be a huge win for our listeners. We have a tradition to pose a final question. And before I get into that, I encourage everyone to go out and grab Gemma's incredible book, Get Well, Stay Well. You've delivered a real masterclass today in terms of the 6 pillars that undergird our health and well-being as leaders of scaling companies. Given your extensive experience, your interaction with a vast array of the vast demographic of the population. Um, can you share with our listeners 3 timeless takeaways?
So, my first timeless takeaway is to think about what's most important to you, and then think about what you could do today to serve what's most important to you. I don't know if that counts as 2, but I was thinking this morning about how that would look on a practical level, and I can come up with an example from my evening last night. So I generally try and aim to speak to somebody that I don't know most days. And my job makes that pretty easy to do because I've got people coming to me every day with problems and I don't know them. So that makes it a bit easier. But sometimes you can find situations that will allow that. And last night, I won't go into the details, but I had a family member I needed to take to the A&E, accident and emergency. And there was a man who was sitting next to us and who really wanted to chat. And so I decided that I would chat with him because one of the things that's most important to me is connection. I like to connect with people and make them feel heard. And this gentleman really wanted to talk. Honestly, I wasn't much in the mood for talking, but I did. I talked to him and we chatted. And, you know, he shared with me that he had been married for 40 years. And I said, wow, what was that like? You know, what are your secrets to success, maintaining a 40-year relationship successfully? And he said, well, 43 years actually, because we were together for 3 years before we got married. I said, okay, yeah, what was your secret to success? And he said, you know, we just communicated. We always talked to each other. And even if we had to have a difficult conversation, we did it with respect and love. And we just, every day felt like an adventure with her. And, you know, he was obviously experiencing a lot of loss because she had died just 4 years ago. And he said that, you know, his life had forever changed. And I think even just listening to his story, it just gave him a real sense of feeling better in the situation he was in, because obviously he was in accident and emergency too. He hadn't been feeling well. And it allowed a real sense of connection in a moment that otherwise was very stressful. And, you know, we talked about little things. He shared that he loves animals, and I suggested he should get himself a dog. And he said, you know what, I think I'm going to take your advice. I think I will get a dog. And, you know, we had this really deep and meaningful conversation amongst all the struggles of the evening. And it just got me thinking, you know, for me, my personal value is connection. And just making a commitment to engaging in a conversation, however much I didn't feel like it, actually made me feel a lot better. Like I really felt so happy at the end of that interaction that we'd both achieved something and got something out of it. And it's a small thing. It really doesn't take much. So that would be my 1 and 2, is to say what's most important to me. And for me, it was connection. Therefore, what can I do today that will reflect what's most important to me? I agreed to chat to somebody that I didn't feel like chatting to, and I got so much out of it.
And a third one.
Oh yeah, number 3. I think number 3 would be whatever is important to you, aim to lead with love. Because not everybody will have the value of connection. There'll be other things that are much more valuable day to day to them. But leading with love will allow other people to get on board with whatever it is that you are aiming to achieve and be. And again, that circles right back to helping people feel understood, helping them feel listened to. You're only going to really be successful, I think, in business and in many other ways in life if you're able to bring other people on board with your mission, bring other people on board with what's important to you. And the best way of doing that is to lead with love.
Oh, Gemma, such profound wisdom. I have absolutely loved this conversation today. The time has flown, and I really appreciate that you navigated through all the technical challenges and really showed up. You've delivered so much value. I love your energy. You're an incredible communicator. There's so much practical advice in the last hour. And again, I appeal to the listeners to go out and grab Gemma's new book, Get Well, Stay Well. You will hugely benefit as a leader. And I encourage you when you read this to get a copy for your team as well. Gemma, how can people learn a little bit more about you? They certainly will want to do that after this. Have they to get ill and book an appointment at your surgery, or is there an easier way to find out a little bit more about you and connect with your work?
Oh, well, thank you for asking. And if you're in my catchment area and you're registered at my GP surgery, then you could get ill, but I'd rather you didn't get ill. You can simply contact me via any social media platform, send me a DM, and I'll do my best to respond. You can look at my website, gemmanewman.com, and on my Instagram, I post recipes, I post nuggets of advice and hopefully things that you find inspiring. LinkedIn, Facebook, I've even got a TikTok account. So you can find me under Dr. Gemma Newman or Plant Power Doctor.
I have no idea how you do all of what you do and show up as you've showed up today. It's incredible. So you're certainly walking your talk, and I encourage people to go and find out more about your work. I wish you every success with what you're doing, Gemma. It's so refreshing to hear a doctor bring in a much more holistic perspective and make it hugely practical for people. So thank you.
Thank you, Brendan. I've loved it. I really have. Thank you so much.